32 tutors walked into Princess Elara Santoro's schoolroom, and every one of them left before sunset, but when a poor librarian opened a battered storybook, the Vampire King's daughter finally looked up. The last tutor departed Blackthorne Palace at 4:17 on a rain-dark Thursday, clutching his leather briefcase so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. He did not bow to the guards. He did not collect the gold promised for finishing the week. He simply crossed the marble courtyard, stepped into his waiting car, and told the driver to leave before the gates closed behind him. From the second-floor window, 7-year-old Elara watched without expression. She sat in a room filled with every book money could buy, every map printed on silk, every educational instrument imported from Europe, yet the desk before her remained untouched. A silver pencil rested exactly where the previous tutor had placed it. An arithmetic book lay open to the first page. Not one answer had been written. Behind her, the tall windows trembled under the rain. The palace staff had learned not to speak about the tutors within Elara's hearing. 32 professionals in 11 months. Historians, linguists, scientists, music teachers. Even a child psychologist from Boston who had lasted 3 hours before quietly requesting transportation back to the airport. Some said the princess was spoiled. Others said she was impossible. A few whispered that there was something wrong with her. Matteo Santoro heard every whisper. He heard things no human could, nervous breaths behind closed doors, lies hiding beneath polite voices. He had ruled the vampire court for more than 2 centuries, negotiated peace between rival houses, and silenced rooms with a single glance. Yet each evening when he stood outside his daughter's schoolroom, all that power became useless. Elara would not read for him. She would not answer questions. She would not explain why every tutor made her eyes turn cold. That afternoon, Matteo remained in the shadowed hallway as the head of household approached. "Your Majesty," Mr. Whitmore said carefully, "the city library has sent someone regarding the damaged collection from the West Wing." Matteo's gaze stayed on the closed schoolroom door. "Send them away. She has already driven nearly 40 miles in this weather." A pause followed. Few people dared continue after Matteo gave an order. Whitmore lowered his voice. "She says the books must be returned by hand because several are too fragile for ordinary transport." Matteo finally looked at him. She, Naomi Carter, assistant librarian, Hawthorne Public Library. 10 minutes later, Naomi stood beneath the palace's vaulted entrance, rain glistening on the shoulders of her faded navy coat. She looked nothing like the people usually summoned to Blackthorne. Her shoes were clean but worn at the edges. Her brown hair had escaped its simple knot in damp strands around her face. She carried a wooden crate against her chest with both arms, protecting it as though it held something alive. Naomi had expected a historic estate, perhaps a wealthy collector, perhaps an eccentric family with too many locked rooms. She had not expected guards who never seemed to blink. She had not expected the unnatural stillness in the air, and she certainly had not expected Matteo Santoro. He appeared at the top of the staircase without announcement, dressed in black, his face strikingly pale beneath the amber lights. He looked no older than his mid-30s, but his eyes carried the cold patience of something ancient. Naomi felt the weight of his attention settle over her. Still, she did not drop her gaze. "Mr. Santoro," she said, adjusting the crate, "these books belong to your family collection. 3 suffered water damage. I repaired what I could." Matteo descended 1 step at a time. "You drove here for books." "For rare books," Naomi replied. "They deserve the effort." Before he could answer, a small sound came from the upper hallway. A door had opened. Elara stood there barefoot in a dark blue dress, her pale face unreadable, her grey eyes fixed on the crate. Whitmore stiffened. 2 maids stopped moving. Matteo turned toward his daughter. But Naomi noticed something everyone else missed. Elara was not looking at the adults. She was looking at the corner of an old green book visible beneath the protective cloth. "You recognize it," Naomi said softly. Matteo's attention snapped back to her. No one addressed Elara without permission. Naomi seemed not to notice. She lowered the crate to the floor, knelt and gently lifted out the worn book. Its cover showed a silver fox standing beneath a painted moon. Elara took 1 silent step closer. This was almost ruined, running her thumb near the repaired spine. But some stories are stubborn. They survive. The child's eyes flickered. It was the first reaction Matteo had seen all day. Naomi sat on the lowest stair instead of approaching her. She opened the book, not to the beginning, but to a page near the middle. The fox had crossed 99 miles of winter, she read, her voice calm and warm, but he stopped at the 100th because he heard someone crying behind a locked door. Elara moved closer. 1 step, Then another. Matteo did not breathe, though he had not needed breath in centuries. Naomi continued reading as if nothing extraordinary were happening. She gave the fox a brave voice, the owl a nervous one, and the moon a whisper so soft that Elara descended the staircase just to hear it. By the time Naomi reached the bottom of the page, the princess stood 3 feet away. "Then what?" Elara asked, 2 words, barely louder than the rain. But they struck the palace like thunder. Whitmore's hand rose to his eyes, filled with tears. Matteo went perfectly still. His daughter had not asked a tutor a question in almost a year. Naomi looked up at Elara, not shocked, not triumphant. "Simply a tat depends," she said. "Do you think the fox opens the door?" Elara glanced at the book, then at Naomi. Slowly she sat on the stair beside her. High above them, the ancient clock marked 4:32. 15 minutes had passed since the 32nd tutor fled. Matteo watched his daughter lean toward the poor librarian, waiting for the next line, and for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, the vampire king felt something more frightening than anger. He felt hope. Naomi did not notice the silence behind her until the story ended. She closed the green book carefully, keeping one finger between the pages, and looked at Elara. "Do you want to hear what happens next?" The girl studied her with solemn grey eyes. "Not if you change the voices." Naomi smiled. "The owl stays worried. Moon keeps whispering." Elara nodded once, as if accepting the terms of a serious agreement. Across the entrance hall, Matteo Santoro stood motionless beside the staircase. He had watched diplomats surrender with less caution than his daughter had used before sitting next to Naomi. For 11 months, Elara had rejected every lesson placed before her. She had closed books, ignored questions, and stared through polished instructors as though they were glass. Yet now she leaned close enough to see the faded illustrations, waiting for a librarian in a rain-damp coat to turn the page. Naomi read on. Her voice changed with each character, never becoming theatrical, never forcing Lance's breathe. When the fox reached the locked door, Naomi stopped. "What do you think is behind it?" Elara frowned at the picture. "Someone who does not want to be found." "Maybe," Naomi said. "Or someone who wants to be found but is afraid of what happens when the door opens." Elara's gaze lifted sharply. Matteo saw it. So did Naomi. For one brief second, the child's guarded expression cracked, revealing something deeper than stubbornness: fear. Naomi did not press. She simply turned the page. That restraint caught Matteo's attention more than the reading itself. Every tutor had tried to correct Elara, diagnose her, or win her approval. Naomi did none of those things. She treated the girl's silence as something worthy of respect. By the time the fox discovered a tiny bird hiding in the dark room, the rain had softened against the windows. Elara's shoulders had lowered. Her hands, which had been clenched in her lap, now rested open beside the book. "Why was the bird hiding?" she asked. "Because everyone kept telling her what kind of song she should sing," Naomi answered. She began to think her own voice was wrong. Elara looked toward Matteo. The glance lasted less than a second, but it carried a weight that settled heavily in the space between father and daughter. Matteo felt it like winter entering an open room. He had ordered tutors to teach royal history, ancient law, mathematics, languages, and court tradition. He had given Elara everything a future heir might need. He had never asked what she wanted to learn. Naomi reached the final page of the chapter and closed the book. Elara immediately placed one small hand over the cover. "You are stopping. I need to return to the library before the roads flood. Stay." The word was quiet, but it was not a request Elara made often. Naomi glanced toward Matteo for the first time since she began reading. His pale face revealed nothing, though his eyes had lost some of their coldness. "Miss Carter," he said, "the storm is expected to continue through the night." Naomi rose slowly. "I can drive carefully. The North Road crosses a low bridge. It becomes unsafe after heavy rain." His tone was calm, factual, absolute. "You will remain here until morning," Naomi almost objected. She had work at 8. Her apartment's heating bill was overdue. Her supervisor disliked excuses, even reasonable ones. But Elara was still holding the book as though letting it go would close something more important than a cover. "I can call the library," Naomi said. Matteo gave a slight nod. Whitmore appeared at once, ready to arrange everything. Elara stood beside Naomi. "Will you read another chapter after dinner?" Naomi looked down at her. "Only if you tell me which character you trust." The girl considered this seriously. "The fox. Why? He listens before he opens doors." Naomi's expression softened. Matteo's did not. But the words landed somewhere he had kept guarded for years. As Whitmore led Naomi toward a guest room, Matteo remained at the foot of the staircase with Elara. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Elara held the green book against her chest and said, She did not tell me what to. Matteo looked toward the hallway where Naomi had disappeared. No, he said, she did not. Elara started upstairs, then paused. Do not send her away. The old clock ticked once in the vast hall. Matteo Santoro had faced rebellions, betrayals, and centuries of enemies without hesitation. But as his daughter waited for his answer, he understood that this was not a command he could give lightly. Naomi Carter had entered Blackthorne Palace carrying damaged books. In less than 1 hour, she had reached a place inside Elara that no one else had been allowed to see. Matteo lifted his gaze toward the shadowed upper floor. She stays tonight, he said. Elara's fingers tightened around the book. It was not a promise for tomorrow. Not yet. But for the first time, she smiled. Dinner at Blackthorne Palace began at 7, though Naomi could not understand how a table built for 20 people could feel so empty with only 3 chairs occupied. Silver candles burned without smoke. Rain traced quiet paths down the tall windows, and beyond the glass the estate disappeared into miles of dark forest. Naomi sat across from Elara, wearing a simple grey dress one of the housekeepers had found for her. Matteo remained at the head of the table, his pale face almost colourless beneath the warm light. No one spoke while the first course was served. Elara watched Naomi. Naomi watched the untouched bowl before the child. Matteo seemed to watch everything. Do meals here always feel like examinations? Naomi asked. A servant nearly dropped a spoon. Matteo lifted his eyes. Most guests do not criticize my table within their first hour. I am not criticizing the table. The table is beautiful. I am criticizing the silence. Elara hid the beginning of a smile behind her glass. Matteo noticed. My daughter prefers quiet, he said. Your daughter prefers not being studied, Naomi replied. The room became still. Matteo's expression hardened, but Naomi did not look away. She had spent years helping children arrive at the library carrying more worry than books. Some hid behind shelves, some spoke too loudly, some refused every recommendation because adults had already made too many choices for them. Elara's silence felt familiar, not protective. You have known her for less than 2 hours, Matteo said. That is true. Naomi folded her hands in her lap, which means I have not had enough time to decide who she is. Elara looked at her father. Matteo heard the child's heartbeat quicken. He could also hear Naomi's, unafraid. That disturbed him more than fear would have. For 214 years, Matteo Santoro had ruled through restraint. He had inherited a divided vampire court and turned it into an order strong enough to survive the modern world. His decisions shaped fortunes. His signature could end old disputes or open new borders. Governors returned his calls. Business leaders waited months for 10 minutes of his time. In every room except this one, his authority was unquestioned. Elara had changed that without ever raising her voice. After her mother died 4 years earlier, the child had retreated by inches. First, she stopped playing the West Garden. Later, she stopped entering the bet stories, lessons, celebrations, and every adult who arrived carrying a plan to improve her. Matteo answered grief the only way he knew. He built schedules, hired experts, filled the palace with resources. Each new tutor made Elara quieter. 32, Naomi said. Matteo's gaze sharpened. What? 32 tutors? Mr. Whitmore mentioned the number while showing me to my room. He should not have. Was Elara allowed to choose any of them? Matteo set down his glass. They were selected for their qualifications. That was not my question. The servant stared at the floor. Elara stared at Matteo. For the first time in years, the king felt cornered at his own table. No, he said at last. Naomi nodded, not with victory but understanding. Then perhaps she was not refusing education. Perhaps she was refusing another decision made without her. Matteo looked toward his daughter. Elara's eyes had lowered to the tablecloth. One small finger traced the embroidered edge. Is that true? He asked. She did not answer. The old frustration rose inside him, cold and immediate. He could command an entire court with 3 words. Yet he could not force a single honest sentence from his child without risking another closed door. Naomi reached for the green storybook beside her chair. She did not open it. She simply placed it on the table between them. The fox waited outside the locked room, she said. Elara looked up, because he knew the bird would not come out if he demanded it. Matteo understood the message. He leaned back slowly. Then what did he do? Naomi turned to Elara. The question belonged to her. The girl studied her father for a long moment. He stayed, she whispered. He let her know he was still there. Matteo's face remained calm, but something ancient and guarded shifted behind his eyes. He had given Elara teachers, security, and every comfort wealth could purchase. He had stood outside her door night after night, believing his silence was patience. Perhaps she had only heard distance. I am still here, he said. Elara's fingers stopped moving. Naomi lowered her gaze, giving them the privacy of not being watched. After several quiet seconds, Elara untouched bowl aside and reached across the table. Her hand did not quite reach Matteo's. He extended his own and closed the distance. Her small fingers rested in his pale palm. No one in the dining room moved. Outside, thunder rolled beyond the hills. Matteo looked at Naomi, and for the first time his expression held no command, only a question he did not yet know how to ask. Naomi understood anyway. Power had taught him how to protect a kingdom. It had never taught him how to reach his daughter. The storm passed some time before dawn, leaving Blackthorne Palace wrapped in silver fog. Naomi woke in the east guest room to the distant sound of a piano playing one careful note at a time. She dressed quickly, folded the borrowed grey dress across the chair, and followed the music through a corridor lined with portraits. Every painted face seemed to watch her pass. At the end of the hall she found Elara alone in a small music room, seated before a black grand piano. The child pressed one key, waited, then pressed another. "I thought you stopped playing," Naomi said from the doorway. Elara did not turn. "I did. That sounded like playing. It was listening." Naomi entered but stayed several feet away. Morning light rested against Elara's pale cheek and made the dust above the piano shimmer. "What are you listening for?" Naomi asked. Elara touched a low key. The note moved through the room like distant thunder, the sound after the sound. Naomi waited until the echo disappeared. Most people forget that part. My mother did not. There it was. The first mention of the Queen. Naomi kept her expression gentle. "Did she teach you?" "She used to sit there." Elara pointed to the empty bench beside her. She said music needed space or it could not breathe. Naomi sat in a chair near the window instead of taking the place Elara had indicated. "She sounds wise." Elara's fingers hovered above the keys. "Everyone says that. They speak about her as if she belongs to the palace now. Like a painting, like a statue." Her voice became smaller. "They do not speak about how she laughed when she burned toast." Naomi felt the truth settle between them. Elara had not lost only a mother. She had watched an entire household turn a living woman into a perfect memory no child could reach. "What else did she do badly?" Naomi asked. Elara looked at her as though no one had ever dared ask such a question. "She sang too loud." "Good. She forgot appointments." Even better, tiny smile appeared. "She cheated at cards." Naomi placed a hand over her heart. "That is serious." Elara laughed. The sound was soft, startled, and gone almost at once, but Matteo heard it from the hallway. He had approached without footsteps, drawn by voices he could recognize from across the palace. Now he stood beyond the open door, unseen, listening as his daughter remembered her mother without crying. "Why did you stop playing?" Naomi asked. Elara looked down at the keys. "The tutors corrected me. That is usually their job. They said I held my hands wrong. They changed the songs. They said mother taught me old methods." Her shoulders tightened. Every time they fixed something, it sounded less like her. The lessons had not felt like education. They had felt like erasure. She moved closer but did not touch the piano. "Then do not play for them." Elara frowned. "Father says I need instruction." "Your father is responsible for preparing you for many things. That does not mean every room must become a classroom." Matteo's eyes narrowed in the hallway, though not from anger. Naomi continued, unaware he was there. "Some things should remain yours." Elara studied the keys. "Could you teach me? Then what can you teach?" Naomi considered the question. How to find answers, how to ask better questions, how to know when a book is telling the truth and when it is only pretending, how to repair a torn page, how to read a story without letting someone else decide what it means. Elara turned fully toward her. "That is more than the others taught." Matteo stepped into the room. The air changed instantly. Elara's smile vanished, and Naomi saw the transformation happen. Her back straightened, her hands folded. The child disappeared behind the princess. Matteo saw it too. "You do not have to stop," he said. Elara stared at him. "You came to check." "I came because I heard you laugh." His voice was quieter than Naomi had heard it before. "I wanted to remember the sound." Elara looked uncertain, as though she had expected correction and did not know what to do with honesty. Matteo approached the piano, then stopped beside the empty bench. "Your mother never held her hands correctly," he said. Elara blinked. "You knew?" She refused to learn. A faint warmth touched his ancient expression. She said correct music was often boring. Elara's eyes brightened. Matteo sat on the bench, leaving space between himself and the child. He placed one finger on a key and played the wrong note. Elara looked at him in disbelief. Then she corrected it. He played another wrong note. This time she laughed before fixing it. Naomi watched from the window as the most powerful vampire in the country deliberately failed a simple melody so his daughter could teach him. The song that followed was uneven, slow, and imperfect. It was also the first music Blackthorne Palace had heard from Elara in 4 years. When it ended, Matteo looked toward Naomi. "Miss Carter, the roads are clear." Elara's face fell. Naomi stood, believing the morning had reached its natural end. Then Matteo added, "But the West Library has not properly catalogued in decades. I am told that requires professional attention." Naomi held his gaze. It could take weeks. "Then you should begin today." Elara went still. Hope appeared carefully in her eyes. Naomi looked from the child to the king and understood that the offer was not really about books. Matteo Santoro was asking her to stay without admitting he needed help. Before Naomi could answer, a bell sounded from deep inside the palace. Once, twice, then a third time. Matteo rose immediately, every trace of warmth leaving his face. "What does that mean?" Naomi asked. His eyes turned toward the western corridor. "Someone has opened a room that has been sealed since my wife died." Matteo moved before the third bell finished echoing. Elara slid from the piano bench, but he turned with one look that stopped her at the doorway. "Stay here." The warmth from moments earlier had vanished. His voice carried the quiet authority of a ruler, yet beneath it Naomi heard something sharper. Fear. "I am coming with you," Naomi said. Matteo faced her. "The opened room is connected to the library you just asked me to catalogue. That offer can wait. The bell cannot." For several seconds neither moved. Elara watched them with both hands pressed against the green storybook. Matteo could have ordered Naomi back to the guest room. Everyone in Blackthorne Palace would have obeyed. Naomi Carter, however, stood in borrowed shoes and met his ancient gaze as though he were only a worried father standing outside a locked door. "Remain behind me," he said at last. They crossed the western corridor while the palace awakened around them. Guards appeared at each intersection. Mr. Whitmore followed with a ring of iron keys, though his face suggested none would be useful. The farther they walked, the colder the air became. Portraits gave way to bare stone. Electric lights ended near an old archway, leaving only amber wall lamps and the grey morning beyond narrow windows. At the corridor's end stood a carved oak door. It was open by 3 inches. A silver seal lay on the floor, unbroken but separated from the wood as though the door had released it willingly. Matteo stopped. "Who entered?" he asked. A guard bowed his head. "No one was seen, Your Majesty." The alarm began when the seal fell. "That is impossible." "I know." Naomi studied the doorway. A thin line of dust covered the threshold, except for one narrow mark near the center. It was too small for an adult shoe. "Elara," she looked down. His expression changed. "She has been here." "Not today," Naomi said. "The mark is older. See how the dust has settled inside it." He crouched, examining the faint impression. The palace staff had searched for explanations in tutors, schedules, and discipline. No one had considered that the child might have been carrying a secret. Matteo pushed the door open. The room beyond was not a tomb, nor a chamber of forbidden weapons. It was a private library. Tall shelves curved around a circular room beneath a painted ceiling of stars. A faded blanket rested on a window seat. Children's books stood beside volumes written in languages Naomi could not identify. On a small table sat a silver music box, a chipped teacup, and a framed photograph of a smiling woman holding a much younger Elara, the late queen. Dust covered almost everything, but a path crossed the floor from the entrance to the far shelves. Someone had visited more than once. Matteo entered slowly. "This room belonged to my wife." His voice sounded distant. "She sealed it herself before she died." Naomi approached the nearest shelf without touching it. Several books had been pulled forward. One was the same series as the green book Elara had held downstairs. The next volume was missing. "The book I repaired came from here," Naomi said. Matteo turned toward her. "It was found in the west wing after a pipe broke last month. It was not left there by accident." Naomi followed the dust path to the window seat. Beneath the blanket she found a small stack of paper tied with blue ribbon. The top sheet was covered in a child's careful handwriting. "Dear Mother, today Father hired another tutor. He says it is for my future, but no one asks what I remember." Naomi did not read further. She held the letter out to Matteo. He stared at it but did not take it. His pale face seemed carved from stone. "How many?" he asked. Naomi lifted the blanket. There were dozens, some written in pencil, some in ink, some on pages torn from school notebooks. Elara had been writing to her mother for years. "She came here to speak where no one could correct her," Naomi said. Matteo finally accepted the top letter. His hand remained steady, but the paper trembled between his fingers. At the bottom of the stack lay a small brass key and a note in different handwriting. Matteo recognized it immediately. I opened the folded page. The message contained only one sentence. When Elara is ready to hear my true voice, open the cabinet behind the stars. Naomi looked up at the painted ceiling. One star, directly above the far wall, was brighter than the rest. Beneath it stood a narrow cabinet hidden between two shelves. Matteo crossed the room and inserted the brass key. The lock opened with a soft click. Inside were 24 sealed envelopes, each marked with a year of Elara's life. The first 7 bore dates from birth through childhood. The rest reached far into a future the Queen had known she would never see. Matteo touched the envelope marked for Elara's 7th year. Her birthday was 3 months ago. Naomi saw grief pass through his eyes, silent and immense. Then this letter belongs to her. A small voice came from the doorway. I know. Elara stood beneath the arch with the green book against her chest. No guard had heard her approach. Her gaze moved from the letters to her father. I found the key last year, she said, but I was afraid to open the cabinet alone. Matteo looked at his daughter, then at the envelope waiting in his hand, and understood that every tutor had been asking Elara to move forward while part of her was still waiting in this room. Elara did not enter the room until Matteo lowered the letter. She crossed the dusty floor slowly, still holding the green book against her chest, and stopped beside Naomi. The cabinet remained open behind her father, its 24 envelopes arranged in perfect rows. Each one carried Elara's name in the same graceful handwriting. Why did Mother make so many? Elara asked. Matteo looked at the letter marked for her 7th year, because she wanted to speak to you on the days she knew she would miss. Elara's eyes stayed on the envelope. Did you know? No. The answer came without defense. Matteo had spent centuries hiding uncertainty behind authority, but he would not hide from his daughter now. I knew she kept journals. I did not know about these. Elara moved closer. Read it. Matteo's fingers tightened around the paper. It was written for you. I want Naomi to read it. The words landed quietly, but Matteo felt their weight. Elara trusted a woman she had met the previous afternoon with something she would not place in her father's hands. Naomi saw the hurt pass across his face before it disappeared. Perhaps your father should read it with you, she said. Elara shook her head. He reads everything like a law. Matteo might have corrected anyone else. Instead, he looked down at the envelope and admitted, that is probably true. Naomi knelt beside Elara. Then we can read it together. Your father can stay. You can stop whenever you want. Elara considered the terms, then nodded. Matteo broke the seal carefully and gave the letter to Naomi. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and lavender, preserved by the cabinet's old magic. Naomi unfolded it and began. My dearest Elara, today you are 7 years old. By now you may be tall enough to reach the 2nd shelf in my library, though I hope you still ask for help when the book is heavy. Elara glanced toward the shelves. She could reach them now, Naomi continued. There will be people who tell you that strength means never needing anyone. They will be wrong. The strongest hearts are not closed. They know when to open. Matteo turned toward the window. The Queen had once said those same words to him. He had dismissed them as hopefulness. Now they returned through Naomi's voice, directed toward the child he had been unable to reach. Your father will try to protect you from every sorrow, Naomi read. He will build walls when he should build doors. Be patient with him. He learned power long before he learned tenderness. Elara looked at Matteo. He did not turn away this time. Was Mother angry with you? She asked. Often, he said. She was usually correct. Naomi read the final lines. Never let anyone turn learning into a cage. Read because you are curious. Play music because silence needs an answer. Ask questions even when the room prefers obedience. Most of all, remember that my love did not end. It only changed the way it reaches you. The room remained still after Naomi finished. No one hurried to fill the silence. Elara touched the bottom of the page. She knew about the tutors. She knew your father, Naomi said gently. Matteo stepped closer. I thought lessons would give you structure. Elara looked at him. They took her away. I understand that now. Do you? Her voice did not rise, but the question carried 4 years of loneliness. Matteo knelt before her, bringing his pale face level with hers. No king had bowed in that room before. I removed her songs because they made you cry. I closed this library because I believed memories were keeping you in pain. I hired tutors because I thought moving forward would save you. He paused. I was wrong. Elara's grip loosened around the green book. You never asked me, no. Matteo's voice softened. But I am asking now. What do you need? Elara looked at the cabinet, the piano room beyond the corridor, and the letters waiting for years not yet lived. I want this room open. It will remain open. I want to choose with guidance. She frowned. Matteo added guidance, not commands. Elara looked toward Naomi. I want her to teach me. Naomi's breath caught. I am a librarian, not a royal tutor. Good, Elara said. I do not want another royal tutor. Matteo rose and faced Naomi. Morning light crossed the room, revealing the exhaustion beneath his composure and the hope he no longer tried to hide. You said the West Library could take weeks. Naomi remembered her overdue bills, her modest apartment, and the supervisor expecting her at 8. She also saw Elara standing beside a cabinet of letters, finally asking for something instead of refusing it. It could take months, Naomi said. Matteo's answer came at once. Before Naomi could respond, Mr. Whitmore appeared at the doorway with a sealed black envelope on a silver tray. Your Majesty, the Council has learned that the Queen's chamber was opened. Matteo's expression turned cold. How? Someone sent word before the bell stopped ringing. Elara moved closer to Naomi. Matteo accepted the envelope and broke the seal. His eyes traveled across the message once, then again. What does it say? Naomi asked. He folded the paper with precise calm. The council is coming to Blackthorne tomorrow. His gaze settled on the open cabinet, and they believe these letters belong to the crown, not to my daughter. By sunset, the 24 letters had been moved from the hidden cabinet to a locked case in Matteo's private study, not because he believed the council had any right to them, but because he knew how quickly private grief could become public property inside a royal court. Elara remained close to Naomi for the rest of the day, carrying the green book from room to room as though it were proof that some doors could open without taking anything away. Naomi called Hawthorne Public Library and explained that the damaged collection required further assessment. Her supervisor complained about schedules, staffing and procedure until Matteo quietly took the telephone. He spoke for less than 1 minute. When the call ended, Naomi had been granted a temporary professional assignment, full pay, and as much time as the restoration required. What did you say? She asked. I offered the library a preservation grant. How large? Large enough to improve their manners. Naomi tried not to smile. Elara did not try at all. The next morning, 3 black cars crossed the stone bridge shortly after 9. The Vampire Council entered Blackthorne Palace beneath a sky the color of steel. There were 5 of them, each dressed with the careful elegance of people accustomed to being obeyed. At their center walked Lady Seraphine Vale, Matteo's senior advisor and the oldest member of the council. Her silver hair was pinned neatly above a face that seemed carved from winter. She greeted Matteo with a formal bow, acknowledged Elara with a measured nod, and looked at Naomi as though someone had left an open umbrella in the throne room. This is the librarian? She asked. Naomi Carter, Matteo said. She is here at my invitation. A human invitation can be withdrawn. Matteo's eyes cooled. The council gathered in the long chamber overlooking the western gardens. Naomi had expected a throne, but Matteo stood at the head of a plain black table. Elara sat beside him, her feet not quite touching the floor. Naomi remained several steps behind the child, close enough to be seen and far enough not to claim a place she had not been given. Lady Seraphine placed both hands on the table. The late Queen's writings may contain matters of succession, treaties, bloodline law, and private agreements with other houses. Under Article 12, all royal documents belong to the Crown Archive. They are birthday letters to my daughter, Matteo replied. You do not know that. I opened one. Then the seal has already been compromised. Elara's fingers closed around the edge of her chair. Naomi noticed before anyone else. The letter was addressed to her, Naomi said. Every face turned. Seraphine's expression barely changed. You were not invited to speak. She was, Elara said. The room became still. Elara's voice was quiet, but she did not look down. I invited her. Seraphine studied the child. Your Highness, affection does not determine ownership. Naomi felt Elara retreat behind her silence again. She stepped forward 1 pace. Neither does fear, Miss Carter, Matteo warned softly, though there was no anger in his tone. Naomi looked at him, then at the council. You are treating the letters as secrets before reading them. That means you are not protecting the crown. You are protecting yourselves from what the Queen might have said. 1 council member shifted in his chair. Another looked towards Seraphine. The reaction was small, but Matteo saw it. What do you expect the letters to reveal? He asked. Seraphine answered too quickly. Nothing. Matteo let the silence lengthen. He had ruled long enough to know that denial often arrived before truth had even entered the room. Then there is no reason to take them from Elara. Seraphine removed a folded document from her case. There is another concern. The Queen's library opened after this woman arrived. A sealed cabinet was discovered. Private writings were handled by an outsider. We have testimony suggesting Miss Carter entered restricted rooms without permission. Naomi felt the accusations settle around her. That is not true. A guard saw you in the western corridor. Matteo brought me there, after the alarm sounded, Seraphine said. But perhaps the alarm was triggered to create that opportunity. Elara stood so suddenly that her chair moved backward. Naomi did not open the room. Seraphine's gaze softened in a way that felt less kind than her coldness. Children are easily influenced. Matteo's hand came down flat on the table. The sound was not loud, but every candle flame bent toward him. Choose your next words carefully. Seraphine lowered her eyes. I mean only that the princess has formed an unusual attachment. Because Naomi listens, Elara said. Her voice trembled, but she continued. None of you do. The council members avoided her gaze. Elara reached into the pocket of her dress and placed the small brass key on the table. I opened the room. Matteo turned toward her. Elara, I found the key last year. Yesterday morning before the piano, I went there because I wanted to see if the door would open. I left when the bell rang. Naomi understood the footprint. The seal had not fallen because of an intruder. It had recognized the queen's daughter. Seraphine stared at the key. That is impossible. The chamber was sealed by royal blood. Elara met her eyes. I have royal blood. Matteo looked from his daughter to the council, and something like pride moved through his face. The accusation against Naomi Carter is dismissed. Seraphine gathered the document, but Naomi saw unease beneath her composure. This meeting had never been only about the letters. Someone had informed the council before the palace staff had understood what happened. Someone had been watching the sealed room. As the council rose to leave, Elara reached for Naomi's hand. Lady Seraphine paused at the doorway and looked back at the green book held beneath the child's arm. For one brief second, recognition crossed her face. Then it vanished. Naomi saw it. Matteo saw Naomi see it. And both understood that the council knew far more about the Queen's library than it had admitted. The council departed before noon, but the questions they left behind remained inside Blackthorne Palace. Naomi returned to the late Queen's library with the green book in her hands and Matteo walking beside her in silence. Elara had been taken to the garden by Mr. Whitmore, not as punishment, but because Matteo had asked for 1 hour to examine the room without forcing his daughter to relive every memory at once. Naomi stopped beneath the painted ceiling and looked toward the bright silver star above the hidden cabinet. Lady Seraphine recognized this book, she said. Matteo closed the door behind them. I saw. She tried to hide it. She has spent more than a century hiding things. His voice was calm, but the air around him had become colder. Naomi studied the repaired cover. The silver fox beneath the moon seemed ordinary until she tilted it toward the window. Then a second image appeared in the faded paint, a small crown hidden among the branches. This was not printed by a commercial publisher, she said. It was made by hand. Matteo took the book carefully. My wife wrote stories for Elara, but I believe they were private amusements. This one may be more than that. Naomi opened the back cover. The binding was old, but one section felt thicker than the rest. She reached for a conservation knife from the repair kit Mr. Whitmore had brought, then paused. I need your permission, Matteo nodded. Naomi loosened the inner paper without damaging the spine. A narrow sheet slid free. It contained no letter, only a list of page numbers and a line written, "The truth is safest inside a story, because proud people rarely listen to children's books." Matteo read the sentence twice. She knew someone was watching her. Naomi turned to the listed pages. On each one, a single word had been marked with a tiny silver dot. Fox, winter, door, song, council, promise. Taken together, the words formed a message. The council promised the winter door would remain closed. Matteo's expression hardened. The winter door was an old name for the Northern Archive. What was kept there? Records from the first covenant between humans and vampires. Naomi felt the scale of the discovery widen. Why would the Queen hide a reference to it in Elara's book? Matteo moved toward a shelf filled with royal histories. Because the council ordered the archives sealed 4 years ago, 1 week before my wife died. Naomi looked at him. Did you agree? I was told the records had been damaged by age. And you believe them? He met her gaze. I trusted people who had served my family for generations. The admission carried more pain than anger. Naomi understood that power did not protect Matteo from betrayal. It only made betrayal more expensive. They searched the room for another hour, following symbols hidden inside illustrations. The moon appeared beside certain sentences. The fox pointed toward shelf numbers. A child's adventure story slowly became a map. At the final marked page, the fox stood before a door made of ice, while a white bird carried a key in its beak. Beneath the picture, the Queen had written a line that did not belong to the printed text. Ask the one who remembers the song after the sound. Naomi went still. Elara. Matteo's eyes lifted. They found her in the west garden beneath a bare maple tree, arranging smooth stones around the edge of a fountain. She looked up as they approached and immediately noticed the book in Naomi's hand. "You opened it. Only the binding," Naomi said. "Your mother left a message." Elara rose. "Did she ever teach you a song about winter?" The child's face changed. "Not Osm." "What was it?" "A pattern." She tapped 4 fingers against the fountain's stone edge. "Slow, slow, fast, slow." She said doors remember rhythm better than keys. Matteo and Naomi exchanged a glance. The northern archive stood nearly half a mile from the main palace, beyond an enclosed walkway that had not been used in years. They reached it before sunset, with Elara between them and 2 guards remaining far behind. The archive door was made of dark metal, not ice, but frost covered its surface despite the mild afternoon. 4 silver circles were set into the center. Elara touched them in the pattern her mother had taught her. Slow, slow, fast, slow. The frost dissolved. A deep click sounded within the wall. Matteo placed one hand on the door and pushed. It opened without resistance. Inside, shelves disappeared into darkness, filled with boxes, ledgers, and sealed cases. No dust covered the floor. Someone had been entering regularly. Naomi stepped inside and saw a lantern still warm on a nearby desk. Matteo's gaze moved to an open registry. On the final page, beneath dates spanning 4 years, one name appeared again in Vale. Elara pointed toward a small wooden box beside the book. The same silver fox was carved into its lid. Matteo opened it. Inside lay the Queen's royal seal, officially reported lost after her death, and a handwritten document bearing the council's mark. Naomi read the first line and felt the room turn colder. By unanimous order, the human education of Princess Elara Santoro must fail until the child willingly surrenders her claim to the mixed covenant. Matteo read the rest in silence. Then he looked at his daughter and the truth became clear. The tutors had not all failed by chance. Someone had chosen them to pressure, isolate, and discourage her. Elara had never been the problem. She had been the target. Matteo closed the wooden box and stood in the center of the northern archive without speaking. The silence around him felt different from the silence at dinner. This one carried judgment. Elara remained beside Naomi, one small hand wrapped around 2 of her fingers. The child had read only the first line of the document, but it was enough. "They wanted me to fail," she said. Matteo turned toward her. "They wanted you to doubt yourself. Why?" He looked at the shelves filled with records older than the country outside the palace walls. "Because your mother believed humans and vampires should be educated together under the same laws." She called it the mixed covenant. Some members of the council believed that promise gave humans too much influence. Naomi opened the registry again, and Elara inherited her claim to continue it. Matteo nodded. If she publicly rejected her education, the council could argue that inside the royal family itself. Elara's face grew still. "So the tutors were sent to make me hate learning." Naomi knelt beside her. "They made learning feel like something that belonged to them. That is not the same as hating it." Matteo reached for the handwritten order, but Naomi stopped him with a quiet word. "Wait," he looked at her. "The document is evidence. So is the registry. If the council knows we found this room, they may claim both were planted. The royal seal proves otherwise, only if the people judging them are willing to accept it." Matteo's gaze sharpened with reluctant approval. Naomi had no title, no court training, and no reason to understand vampire law. Yet she understood something many rulers forgot. Truth alone did not always defeat a lie. Truth needed witnesses. Matteo called the 2 guards inside and ordered them to observe every item exactly where it had been found. Mr. Whitmore arrived with a camera, archival gloves, and 3 members of the palace legal staff. Each page was photographed. Each seal was recorded. The warm lantern was placed in a clear case, and its oil was tested to establish that someone had visited the archive that morning. Naomi examined the open registry while the others worked. Several entries carried Lady Seraphine's name, but the handwriting changed after the first year. "These signatures are copied," she said. Matteo came to her side. "You are certain? The shape is similar. Look at the final stroke. The earlier entries rise, the later ones fall." Mr. Whitmore studied the page. "Then someone may have used her name." Matteo's expression did not soften. "Or she taught someone to imitate it." Naomi turned another page and found initials beside the dates. CR the same initials appeared beside notes about tutor appointments, school evaluations, and sealed reports sent to the council. "Who is CR?" she asked. Matteo did not answer immediately. Then his face became colder than the frosted door. "Calvin Rook, the council's education secretary." Elara looked up. "He chose my tutors. He approved every one of them," Matteo said. The pieces aligned with terrible precision. Lady Seraphine had known about the book. Calvin Rook had controlled the tutors. Someone inside the palace had warned the council when the Queen's room opened. The plan had not depended on one person. It had depended on a system that made every failure look ordinary. Matteo ordered the archive sealed under royal guard, then returned to Blackthorne with Naomi and Elara before nightfall. He did not summon the council in secret. He called for a public royal hearing the next morning and sent formal notice to every vampire house bound by the covenant. By midnight, the Great Hall had been prepared. Cameras would record the proceedings. Human legal observers from 3 states had been invited. Representatives from Hawthorne Public Library were asked to verify the preservation records. Naomi read the list twice. "You are making this impossible to hide. That is the intention." Matteo stood at the tall window of his study. The city lights faint beyond the forest. For centuries, the council has survived by keeping disputes inside closed rooms. Tomorrow, the room will be open. Elara sat near the fireplace with the green book in her lap. Will they take Naomi away? Matteo turned. No. Will they send more tutors? No. Will you still let me choose what I learn? He crossed the room and knelt before her. Yes. Elara studied him carefully. Even if the council says no, Matteo placed his hand over the cover of the book, especially then. Naomi watched a father and daughter hold each other's gaze without fear for the first time. Then a knock came at the study door. Mr. Whitmore entered carrying a small envelope recovered from the archive. It bore no date and no name, only the Queen's silver fox pressed into black wax. This was hidden beneath the registry, he said. Matteo opened it. Inside was a single note in his wife's handwriting. Seraphine is not the architect, she is the witness who became too afraid to speak. Calvin Rook serves someone closer to the throne. Matteo read the sentence aloud. Elara looked toward the dark hallway. Naomi felt the meaning before anyone said it. The conspiracy had not ended with the council. Someone inside Blackthorne Palace had been guiding it from the beginning. The message changed the hearing before it began. Matteo ordered every entrance to Blackthorne Palace monitored, every communication log preserved, and every member of the household accounted for from the hour the Queen's library opened. No one was confined, no one was accused. Matteo understood that fear could make innocent people look guilty and guilty people look prepared. By 8 the next morning, the Great Hall was filled with representatives from the vampire houses, human legal observers, palace staff, and members of the council. Cameras stood along the rear wall. The 24 letters remained locked in Matteo's study, but copies of the registry, the hidden order, and the Queen's note rested beneath clear protective covers on the central table. Naomi sat beside Elara in the front row. The child wore a dark blue dress and held the green book in both hands. She had asked to attend. Matteo had agreed only after promising that she could leave at any moment. Lady Seraphine entered alone. Calvin Rook followed several minutes later, carrying a leather folder and wearing the calm expression of a man who believed procedure would protect him. Matteo stood at the front of the hall without a throne behind him. This hearing concerns the deliberate obstruction of Princess Elara Santoro's education, the concealment of royal records, and the misuse of the late Queen's seal, he said. His voice did not rise, yet the room became completely still. The evidence will be examined publicly. Calvin adjusted his cuffs. Your Majesty, public examination of internal royal matters is highly irregular. So was selecting 32 tutors to make a child believe she was incapable of learning. Several faces turned toward Move. That is an emotional interpretation, not a legal conclusion. Naomi felt Elara's hand tighten around the book. Matteo placed the tutor records on the table. Each instructor had received a private directive from the council's education office. Some were told never to allow Elara to choose reading material. Others were required to report curiosity as defiance. One had been ordered to remove every lesson connected to the late Queen. These directives carry your authorization, Matteo said. Calvin looked at the pages. My office approved them. I did not write them. Who did? The recommendations came from inside the palace. A murmur moved through the hall. From whom? Calvin opened his folder. The late Queen's former Chief Secretary, Adrian Bell. Mr. Whitmore inhaled sharply. Adrian Bell had served the Queen for 12 years and remained at Blackthorne after her death as keeper of royal correspondence. He stood near the side wall, an unremarkable man with thinning brown hair and a face people rarely remembered. Every report from the tutors had passed through his hands before reaching the council. Matteo turned toward him, stepped forward. Adrian did not run. He walked to the center of the hall and bowed. "Your Majesty, did you recommend the restrictions placed on Elara's education?" "I did." Elara looked at him as though seeing him for the first time. Adrian had brought birthday cards to her room. He had read official messages at breakfast. He had been present in the palace for nearly every year she could remember. "Why?" Matteo asked. Adrian's eyes moved toward the human observers. "Because the Queen's plan would have weakened the crown." Lady Seraphine stood. "That was never your decision to make." Adrian looked at her. "You knew the archive existed. You knew the council had concerns. You chose silence." Seraphine's face tightened. "I knew there was disagreement. I did not know you were manipulating the princess." Matteo placed the Queen's note beside the registry. "My wife called you closer to the throne than Calvin Rook. She discovered what you were doing." For the first time, Adrian's composure shifted. She misunderstood. Naomi looked at the green book. "No." She hid evidence in a story because she knew official records could be controlled by the person responsible for royal correspondence. Adrian turned toward her. "You have been here 3 days, long enough to notice that every hidden message avoided the palace archive." She opened the book to the page with the white bird and the frozen door. "The Queen trusted stories because you controlled letters." The room seemed to narrow around Adrian. Matteo asked one final question. "Did you send word to the council when the sealed room opened?" Mr. Whitmore stepped forward with a communication ledger. A call had left Adrian's office less than 1 minute after the bell sounded. The destination was Calvin Rook's private line. Calvin looked at Adrian with open disbelief. "You told me the room had been opened by the librarian. I told you what was necessary. You used the council." Adrian's calm finally broke, not into anger, but exhaustion. "I protected a system that survived for centuries." The Queen wanted human schools inside vampire territory. Shared courts, shared records. She called it peace. I called it surrender. Elara rose from her chair. Her voice was small, but every microphone carried it. "So you made me think I was stupid." Adrian looked at her and found no answer. Not to hide Elara, but to stand with her. "The mixed covenant will be restored," he said. "Calvin Rook is removed from the education office pending full review. Adrian Bell is dismissed from royal service and will answer before an independent court. Lady Seraphine will testify regarding every concealed council action." Seraphine bowed her head. "I will." Elara looked up at her father. "And the tutors? Their records will be reviewed. Those who knowingly followed harmful instructions will never teach under the crown again." The hall remained silent as Adrian surrendered his seal of office. No force was needed, no threat was spoken. The evidence had done what power alone could not. It had opened the door. When the hearing ended, Matteo turned to Naomi, but she was watching Elara. The child had opened the green book to the final page. Beneath the printed ending, another line had appeared in silver ink, visible only in morning light. "When the false keeper is named, the last letter may finally be opened." Matteo looked toward his private study. Among the 24 envelopes was one without a year, sealed in white wax. At last they knew it had been waiting for the truth. The great hall emptied slowly, leaving behind the soft movement of chairs, fading footsteps, and the weight of truths that could no longer be hidden. Matteo waited until every camera had been removed before leading Elara and Naomi to his private study. Mr. Whitmore followed with the locked case that held the Queen's letters, then placed it on the desk and quietly closed the door behind him. For the first time that morning, no council member watched them. No legal observer took notes. No one waited to turn grief into evidence. Matteo opened the case. 24 envelopes stood in careful order, one for each year of Elara's life, and beneath them rested the white envelope that carried no date. Its wax seal bore neither the royal crest nor the silver fox. It carried a simple image of 3 stars. Matteo stared at it. "Your mother drew those stars on the first letter she ever sent me," he said. Elara stood beside him. "One for her, one for me, one for the future she hoped we would have." Elara touched the edge of the envelope but did not lift it. "Then the third one was me." Matteo's voice softened. "Yes." Naomi remained near the window, giving them room, but Elara looked back at her. "Will you read this one too?" Naomi approached. "Only if that is what you want." Elara nodded, then placed the envelope in Matteo's hand. "You should open it." Matteo broke the white seal with unusual care. Inside were 3 pages and a smaller folded note. He gave the pages to Naomi but kept the note unopened. Naomi began reading. "My beloved Matteo and my brave Elara, if you are hearing these words together, then the truth has finally left its hiding place. Matteo closed his eyes for 1 second. Naomi continued. I discovered that Adrian Bell was using his position to weaken the mixed covenant. I also discovered that the council feared scandal more than injustice. Seraphine knew enough to ask questions, but not enough to stop what had already begun. I hid the records because official channels were no longer safe. Elara listened without moving. I did not create these clues because I doubted Matteo's strength. I created them because strength can be surrounded by loyal faces and still be denied the truth. Matteo lowered his gaze. Those words reached him more deeply than any accusation spoken at the hearing. Naomi turned the page. Elara, they may try to teach you that your human heritage makes you less worthy of the vampire crown. They are wrong. Your mother was human. Your father is a vampire. You were never meant to choose which half of yourself deserved love. You were born to prove that the old walls were built by fear, not necessity. Elara pressed a hand against the green book. She knew they would say that about me. She knew they might try, Matteo said, but she also knew you would be stronger than their words. Naomi read on. Matteo, do not prepare our daughter for a lonely throne. Prepare the world to receive the person she chooses to become. Let her learn beside humans. Let her ask questions of vampires. Let her read stories that make old laws uncomfortable. A crown should protect a child's curiosity, not replace it. The study became quiet except for the clock on the mantel. Naomi reached the final paragraph. The mixed covenant was never only a legal agreement. It was a promise that no child would be taught to fear the blood of another. Restore it openly. Place its future in classrooms, libraries, and shared records where no single keeper can bury it again. Then let Elara decide whether she wishes to inherit the work. Naomi lowered the pages. Do I have to? Matteo knelt before her. No, even if Mother wanted it? Your mother wanted you to have the choice, Elara thought carefully. I want to learn about it first. Matteo smiled, faintly but without sadness. That is a wise beginning. He opened the smaller note. It held only 2 lines. For the day you finally listen to each other, play our song badly. Leave room after the last note. Matteo gave a quiet laugh. Elara recognized the words at once and ran, still carrying the green book. Naomi and Matteo followed. He sat beside his daughter on the long bench, exactly where he had sat that morning. Elara placed her fingers on the keys. Matteo played the first wrong note. She corrected him. He played the second one too slowly. She laughed and continued. Naomi stood nearby as the unfinished melody filled the room, imperfect and warm. When the final note faded, no one spoke. They listened to the sound after the sound, just as the Queen had taught Elara. In that silence, Matteo reached for his daughter's hand. Elara reached for Naomi's. The 3 of them remained there while morning light crossed the piano. And the last locked room inside Blackthorne Palace finally opened. In the weeks after the hearing, Blackthorne Palace changed in ways no decree could have achieved alone. The sealed corridors were opened. The Queen's library was cleaned, catalogued, and filled with light. The Northern Archive was transferred to independent preservation teams, with every record copied into both human and vampire repositories, so that no single official could hide the truth again. Matteo signed the restoration of the mixed covenant at the same black table where the council had once tried to claim Elara's letters. This time Elara sat beside him by choice. Naomi stood on her other side, wearing the same navy coat she had arrived in, though Mr. Whitmore had quietly repaired the worn seams. The new agreement established shared libraries, scholarship programs, and schools where human and vampire children could study history without being taught to fear one another. Lady Seraphine testified publicly about the council's failures and resigned as senior advisor. She did not ask for forgiveness. She asked to help build safeguards that would make silence more difficult in the future. Matteo accepted her service under strict oversight, not because he had forgotten her fear, but because accountability meant more than removing one person and pretending the system had healed. Calvin Rook was permanently barred from educational office. Adrian Bell faced an independent court, where the evidence was reviewed without royal interference. Every tutor who had taught Elara was investigated. Several had followed harmful instructions knowingly and lost their credentials. Others had been deceived and came forward with records that strengthened the case. Matteo refused to punish them as a group. Naomi noticed that the king who once answered uncertainty with control had begun to separate justice from anger. Elara noticed too. Her education resumed, but no new tutor arrived with a rigid schedule. Instead, she chose 3 subjects for the first season: music, storytelling, and the history of the mixed covenant. Naomi taught her how to compare sources, repair fragile pages, and ask questions that powerful people preferred to avoid. A human science teacher from Boston visited twice each week. A vampire historian came on Fridays and was required to answer Elara's questions before assigning any reading. Matteo attended one lesson every Sunday. He was not permitted to interrupt. Elara made that rule herself. The greatest change began in the West Wing. Matteo offered Naomi the position of Royal Librarian and Director of Shared Learning, with responsibility for rebuilding the palace collection and creating public programs across the region. The salary was more than Naomi had earned in several years combined. The title came with rooms at Blackthorne, a staff, an authority to challenge any educational order issued under the crown. Naomi read the contract at the long dining table while Elara watched from across the room. "You added a clause protecting librarians from royal interference," Naomi said. Matteo lifted his glass. "You have demonstrated that interference may be unwise. You also gave me the right to refuse your requests." That clause was Elara's suggestion. The child looked pleased. Naomi set down the pages. "I will accept under one condition." Matteo's expression became cautious. "Name it. The restored library must open to the public, not only scholars, not only royal families, anyone who wants to read." Several advisors had warned Matteo that allowing ordinary visitors into Blackthorne would be difficult. Security would need to be redesigned. Ancient collections would require protection. Centuries of tradition would object. Matteo looked at Elara. She held the green storybook against her chest and waited. "Agreed," he said. 3 months later, the west doors opened for the first public reading day in Blackthorne's history. Families drove from towns nearly 100 miles away. Human children entered beside young vampires beneath banners carrying the silver fox. Some arrived in expensive cars. Others came in school buses or borrowed trucks. No one was asked about bloodline before receiving a library card. Elara read the first story aloud from the window seat where her mother had once written letters for the future. Her voice trembled at first. Naomi sat nearby without correcting her. Matteo stood at the back of the room, where he could see every face and hear every heartbeat. When Elara reached the final page, she stopped and invited the children to choose the ending. Hands rose across the room. Answers came in different voices, uncertain and bright. Elara listened to each one. Then she looked toward her father. Matteo did not speak for her. He simply nodded. The girl who had once refused every lesson smiled and asked the next question. 1 year after Blackthorne Palace opened its library doors, the silver fox became a symbol across the region. It appeared on library cards, school signs, and the blue buses that carried human and vampire children to shared classrooms each morning. The mixed covenant no longer existed only in old records. It lived in ordinary moments. Children argued over science projects, traded books at lunch, and discovered that curiosity sounded the same in every heartbeat. Elara stood at the center of that change. Though Matteo never allowed the court to turn her into a symbol before remembering she was still a child. She studied 3 days each week at Blackthorne and 2 days at Hawthorne Public School, where no one bowed when she entered the room. At first, she found that strange. Then she found it wonderful. She made friends, joined a reading club, and learned that making mistakes in front of people who cared was not the same as failing. Naomi continued directing the shared learning program from the restored West Library. Under her leadership, 12 community libraries received preservation grants, 6 rural schools added evening reading hours, and the Northern Archive became available to qualified researchers under independent supervision. No document could be removed without 2 witnesses and a public record. No official, including Matteo, could seal educational materials without review. Lady Seraphine helped design those protections before retiring from the council. At her final public meeting, she admitted that silence had allowed injustice to appear respectable. Elara accepted the apology but did not excuse the choice. "You should have spoken sooner," she said. Seraphine bowed her head. "Yes, Your Highness." Calvin Rook was permanently removed from public office. Adrian Bell received a fair judgment from the independent court and was forbidden from holding any position connected to royal records or education. Neither man was allowed to disappear into rumor. Their actions were documented, their methods exposed, and the systems they misused were rebuilt so that one person could never control the truth again. The 32 tutors also received individual review. Those who knowingly followed harmful instructions lost their licenses. Those who had been deceived completed new training and publicly corrected their reports about Elara. The child once described as impossible was formally cleared of every false evaluation. Matteo signed that order himself. She drew a small silver fox beneath his name. On the anniversary of the first public reading day, Blackthorne hosted families from 5 states. More than 400 guests filled the gardens, halls, and library rooms. Elara opened the celebration by reading the story of the fox and the hidden bird. This time, when she reached the locked door, she did not ask someone else to choose the ending. The fox stayed, she read, until the bird understood that an open door was not a command to leave, it was permission to choose. She closed the book and the room answered with warm applause. Matteo stood beside Naomi near the rear shelves. He no longer watched every gathering as though danger waited inside each shadow. He still heard every heartbeat, but he had learned that protection did not require controlling every step. "You changed this palace," he said. Naomi looked toward Elara, who was helping a nervous boy find the courage to read aloud. "She changed it. You listened when the rest of us were trying to speak for her." Naomi smiled. Someone had to leave room after the sound. Matteo looked at her with the quiet gratitude of a king who had finally learned that asking for help did not weaken his authority. "Will you remain at Blackthorne?" he asked. Naomi glanced around the library she had restored, at the children filling its tables, and at Elara laughing beneath her mother's painted stars. "As long as the doors stay open, then they will never close again." That evening, after the final bus crossed the bridge and the palace settled into peaceful silence, Matteo, Naomi, and Elara entered the music room. Elara sat at the piano and played her mother's song from beginning to end. Matteo missed one note on purpose. Naomi laughed. Elara corrected him, then let the final note fade naturally into the room. No hidden message appeared. No sealed door waited beyond the hall. Every letter had been read, every accusation had been answered, every record had been secured. Elara no longer feared losing her mother by learning something new, because she understood that memory was not a room that education could erase. Matteo no longer mistook control for care, because his daughter had shown him that love must listen before it leads. Naomi no longer returned each night to a cold apartment and overdue bills. She had a home, meaningful her freely. Elara reached for both of their hands. Beyond the windows, moonlight rested on the open library doors. Once Blackthorne Palace had been known for secrets, silence, and a king no one dared question. Now it was known for a child who asked questions, a librarian who honored them, and a father who finally listened. The throne had preserved Matteo's kingdom for centuries, but kindness had saved his family, and in the peaceful space after the last note, the three of them understood that the story was no longer waiting for an ending. They had already written it together.